My name is Lauren Hogan, and I'm the Director of Credit and Asset Management in Dallas, Texas. Trimont specializes in asset management of complex performing and non-performing credit on behalf of lenders and investors around the world. In my role at Trimont, I manage a portfolio of over $1 billion across all asset types around the country. One piece of advice that I would like to give you all comes from experience, and it's something that I wish I realized earlier in my career. Take advantage of the Rolodex you probably don't even realize you have. And what I mean by that is don't be afraid or don't be hesitant to reach out to people in all aspects of your career. For example, feel free to reach out to Kelly and say, hey, Kelly, I saw a role at Bank of America that was posted. Do you have 5 minutes to chat? We were both on the NYU conference. Or feel free to reach out to me and say, hey, Lauren, I saw that you manage this asset in Dallas or in California. Do you need a new property manager? You'd be so surprised how willing people are to actually help. So now I'm very excited to introduce Michelle KLEGER. Michelle is Vice President of Business Development at Kensington Vanguard, which is one of the largest independent full-service national insurance title agencies in the country. Michelle has developed strong relationships with her clients and has closed thousands of deals over the last few years, amounting to a couple of billions of dollars. In addition to her day job, she founded Girl Gang with Gabby Simon in 2016, which now has over 750 members. I encourage you all to check out Girl Gang and join. The goal of Girl Gang is to allow women in real estate to create both professional and personal relationships. Michelle, the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. It is a true honor to be on this panel with such accomplished women in the real estate industry. Big thank you to my co-chairs for making today possible, and to Sam Chandon and NYU SHAC for giving us this platform. This panel is going to discuss next generation acquisitions leaders and their perspectives on the real estate market. Today, you will be hearing from my dear friends who are all female executives in the commercial real estate business. Andrea Himmel, Director of Acquisitions at Himmel Meringoff, Amanda RYZOWY, Senior Vice President at L+M Development, KELSEY DURELS, Vice President at Praedium Group, and KELSEY BODENSTAB, Vice President at Artemis Real Estate Partners. First, we will do brief introductions. Ladies, please introduce yourself, your company, and your focus in the real estate industry. Let's start with Andrea.
Thanks, Michelle, for having me. And I just want to thank NYU and this whole setup. And Michelle is a good friend of mine. Everyone should follow her in her career. But anyway, I'm Andrea Himmel. I live in New York City. I grew up here. I work at Himmel Meringoff Properties, which, based on the name, you might know that my mother founded our company in 1979 with Stephen Meringoff. We own a multi-billion-dollar portfolio of office buildings in Manhattan and industrial buildings in industrial warehouses in the boroughs. So we only focus on New York City. We're long-term, very patient owners and creative on the deal-making side. I have not always been in this space, but we'll talk about our careers, I guess, in a little bit. But I spent the majority of my career actually in oil and gas, which is below ground real estate. So anyway, thank you for having me, and I look forward to connecting with anyone here.
Thanks, Andrea. Amanda, let's go to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda RYZOWY. I work at L+M Development Partners, as Michelle, the ultimate connector, a networker, has said. Andrea, I was actually at JP Morgan in commodity finance in oil and gas before real estate. So
we have a lot to talk about. Yeah,
I feel you a lot. When I decided not to do due diligence climbing a wind turbine, then I moved into real estate, and I'm from New York also. So L+M is an owner operator of workforce and affordable housing. I'm in the private equity group here, which started about a decade ago. And our bread and butter was ground up new construction affordable housing starting back in the 80s. But since then, we've grown, done over $10 billion of investment and development. We own about 35,000 units, and we're also expanding nationally. So looking to do work not just in New York and New Jersey, but also in Florida, Texas, and California. And I've been here for about 8 years.
Thanks, Amanda. Let's go to Kelsey B.
Hey, everybody. Hi, Michelle. Thanks so much for having me. Really excited to participate in this. So I'm a VP on the acquisitions and asset management team at Artemis Real Estate Partners. And Artemis is one of the only women-founded real estate private equity funds. It was founded by Debbie Harmon and Penny Pritzker. It's headquartered in DC. I sit in our New York office, and I am investing in debt and equity across all asset classes throughout the country.
Thank you. And last but not least, Kelsey D.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Michelle, so much for having me. My name is Kelsey DURELS, and I'm a Vice President of Acquisitions for the Praedium Group. We're also a real estate private equity fund, primarily focused on multifamily assets. The company was founded in 1991, and we were actually the real estate investing arm of Credit Suisse First Boston. We ended up spinning out in 1999, and since then have sponsored a series of private equity vehicles. All the employees of the company, including myself, sit in New York, but we actually invest across the country, primarily in the Sun Belt regions of the country. So in terms of the team, we divide ourselves geographically. I personally cover the Carolinas, Tennessee, California, and Nevada, not necessarily a contiguous territory, but I started with the company as an analyst, and that's kind of where I grew my expertise and have maintained those markets from the beginning.
Awesome. Thanks, Kels. So moving on, can you tell the audience a little about how you chose your career path in real estate and the steps that took you to get there? I think we have a lot of younger professionals and people that are in school, so I think they would be interested to find out how you guys ended up where you are. So let's start with, let's do a different order. We'll do Kelsey B. Let's start with you.
Sure. So it kind of feels like when you ask people this, they tend to either know someone in real estate or have something that was the impetus for them going into real estate. So for me, I had an uncle who was a very small scale kind of personal investment, but developer who did adaptive reuse in Seattle. And I just always loved hearing his stories about the projects he was working on. And I went to Lehigh University, and they have a real estate program, which is somewhat unique. And just having that initial thought of, oh, you know, real estate could be kind of an interesting opportunity. I was definitely drawn to finance numbers, but once I started taking real estate courses, it became immediately clear that this is an industry that lets you kind of flex your creative muscle and but also do the very analytical finance work as well. So it just, you know, as I became more interested in it, I found an internship at SL Green in sort of an acquisitions investment oriented role. And then right out of school, I started my career at PwC in a valuation consulting real estate role. And from there, I spent 5 years on the acquisitions team at another private equity fund called Garrison Investment Group, where I had kind of a similar role. It was all asset classes all across the country. And I've been now at Artemis for 2 years. And I think people tend to think like you either need to start in acquisitions or it's hard to break into, but it sounds like it's true for the other ladies as well. Didn't necessarily start in acquisitions, but I like to remind people that, you know, I didn't start in acquisitions and I pivoted into it a few years into my career, and it's very much possible. So people shouldn't ever get discouraged if either you can't find an acquisitions role or don't start an acquisitions role. It's never too late.
I think we might hear a little bit of that on this panel. Let's go to Andrea next.
Sorry, to
Andrea?
Oh, great. sorry, I didn't recognize my own name. So I went to Wharton undergrad where I studied real estate, and obviously I grew up with a mother who was a landlord in New York City, and just to speak to how few women there are in New York City, she's probably the largest female landlord in New York, but that's just because there aren't that many. So I studied real estate undergrad. I worked at Brookfield for 2 years, and there was the recession. Brookfield back then wasn't quite as dynamic as it is today. So I tried to interview, and no one would hire me because my mom is in the industry, and everyone thought, oh, she's just going to go work for her family. Meanwhile, my mom said, don't work for me. Don't even work in real estate. If you want to work for me ever, you have to work for 10 years on your own. But don't even work in real estate. If you want to be better at real estate, go learn finance and underwriting and valuation. So I worked for a hedge fund. The co-founder of Sanford Bernstein and CEO of AllianceBernstein was just launching a new platform. Currently manages 60 billion. I ultimately became responsible for about 3 billion of that, investing in oil and gas stocks. In 2016, oil prices collapsed, and I saw an opportunity on the private markets to take advantage of the arbitrage. So I tried to raise my own fund for a year, was rejected by about 2,000 investors, finally raised a small friends and family fund, tripled it in a year, and then raised 300 million from a hedge fund in New York for this oil and gas strategy. 3 years ago, I kind of stepped back from that day to day because we built a company and an office in Houston, and I joined I did join my mom's company after she conceded that she kind of was overwhelmed with work and understaffed. She previously was the acquisitions team. Now I am the acquisitions team. And so it's kind of how I've stumbled throughout this journey of real estate below grade and above grade.
It's great. Thank you, Andrea. Amanda, let's have you go next.
So my path was definitely not linear. I grew up in New York. My father's a real estate lawyer, but that really had, maybe psychologically, I wanted to work with him when I got older, but that really had nothing to do with my career trajectory. And I went to college and I studied physics. So not real estate related again, but like KELSEY, I like numbers, finance, and my mom was concerned when I studied physics, I'd never get a job. So I convinced her that maybe one day I could go into finance with my background. And as I mentioned earlier, I spent kind of my business school years at JP Morgan in the investment bank. And then I wanted something that was New York centric and that was social, and that was in finance, and real estate marries all of those three categories. So since then I've been at L+M, and I basically like to say I kind of convinced my now boss, who's been my boss for 8 years, that when we met, it was an interview. He probably just thought he was just meeting me to be nice, but I just said, I have nothing to offer you besides the fact that I know Excel and I can do financial modeling, even though I don't know real estate, but I promise you I will stay here as late as possible to just do any type of spreadsheet you want. And that kind of grew into just me being in the acquisitions group, and now it's originating, underwriting, dealing with dispositions and acquisitions, and growing our platform.
It's a great story. KELSEY.
Like the others, I also actually didn't take a real estate job right out of school. I actually started in investment banking out of undergrad, primarily working on IPOs for consumer products companies. I went to UVA for undergrad. I was in the undergraduate business school there. And I feel like just at the time, everyone was pretty much going either banking or consulting. And those were really like the only two options. And I kind of just followed what everyone else was doing. I think like a lot of people who work in the real estate industry, I also have family in the industry. So it was always kind of interesting to me, and I chose real estate on top of finance as my second concentration in the undergraduate business school. And it was kind of poor timing because it wasn't until my senior year real estate classes that we really started looking at real estate, valuing real estate, building out financial models. And I just kind of thought to myself, I kind of like this better than valuing companies. At that point, I had already accepted my banking job. So I basically stuck with my 2 years in the investment bank. And then immediately following my 2 analyst years, I started interviewing for real estate companies, and I've been with Praedium since that time, so about 7 years now.
This panel shows you that you do not have to start in real estate to be in an acquisition role, if anything.
Also, by the way, you don't have to have family in the business. Just like, I'll just give you an example. My mom broke into the business actually because of NYU. She was attending, Harry Helmsley used to teach a class every Tuesday night that she used to attend at NYU. Sorry, Larry Silverstein was the teacher. The lecturer that day was Harry Helmsley. My mom sat in the front row and all, in the middle. And Harry was asked if there were any questions. My mom's hand goes up and she says, "What's your greatest accomplishment?" And he said something that would not be acceptable today. He said, "What are you doing tonight?" So then Steve Meringoff, her current partner, approached her and said, "You have balls. I like that. We should be partners. What are you doing working on like on the finance side?" She was working then at Integrated Resources. He said, "Why don't we work together?" So you can break into real estate from any angle. You don't have to have family in the business. I think a lot of us are very fortunate to have that door open for us. But it's really grit and hustle that'll get you the preponderance of your success.
100%. And Leslie is a legend. All right, so we're going to chat a little bit about being a woman in real estate. We are at a Women's Emerging Leaders event. So through your career so far, do you think that being a woman in an acquisitions role has presented more challenges or more opportunities, and how? You want to start, Andrea?
Sure. I don't think it's been detrimental in any shape or form. I think when I was founding my oil private equity fund, it took hiring a co-founder who is male to be taken seriously in the investment community for fundraising. But we were a great team, and I learned a lot from him. And we're still good friends, till today. But I'd say I'm also gay, so I feel like I'm in a minority within the women's groups of the women, side of the female side of the industry. But I want to see I want to see women rising, from any angle, whether it's construction, design. Like we're really into mentorship, and yeah, I mean that's what I'd add.
Kelsey, DURELS. So we go next.
Yeah. So I personally think it's a little bit of both. In my role in particular, I'm primarily focused on sourcing new acquisitions. So there's not only an analytical aspect to that, but there's also a big relationship aspect to that. And I feel like we are starting to see more women going into acquisitions, which is great. I feel like sometimes some of the challenges are not necessarily just being a woman, but just being like a younger woman. I know Michelle and I were actually talking about this the other day. I feel like just all the time I'm constantly like picking up the phone, calling guys who are my parents' age, trying to get them to work with me and sell me deals. And sometimes that dynamic can be just a little interesting when you're trying to win deals over, guys who have been friends for my whole lifetime. But I think on the flip side, there's also a lot of opportunities. There's opportunities to form new relationships, to do things differently than they've been done in the past, to just look for opportunities where other people aren't looking for opportunities, and really kind of set yourself apart in that regard. I also think it's kind of fun to go to a conference and, be one of the few girls there. I would encourage everyone to use that to your advantage and follow up with people and be like, "Hey, remember me? I'm the girl you met at the conference. Like, you're pretty memorable." So I would encourage everyone to kind of use that to your advantage, because when that deal does finally come your way, it's a really rewarding experience.
I'll also add, Michelle, that from the industrial perspective, a lot of the people we try to buy the buildings from are kind of like owner occupants. So say someone works in the cement industry or corrugated box manufacturing. So these guys, when I try to you know, when I reach out, canvas, kind of, you know, put myself out there in front of them, it's a wide array of reactions, but I've seen everything from, oh, I think you're really pretty, are you sure you're gay, to like, I really respect what you've built and done, and I want to do a deal together. So it ranges.
Absolutely. Amanda, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, I guess after all these years, I mean, not all these years, but I've just found it easier to just own it. Similar to what Kelsey said, it's like, yep, I'm a woman. What are you going to do about it? And you just kind of go into a situation. I just kind of own that fact, but it very quickly just goes out the door, because what I found helps the most is you're just over prepared. Unfortunately, I think that if you are over prepared, which might mean you have to spend a couple more minutes preparing for a meeting, you make that first impression, and then the gender dynamic is not as prevalent. I'm also a mother of two. I just had a baby my second baby in December. And it's just a lot of multitasking, and every relationship with your partner is different. So some moms might take on more or less, or there might be two moms or two dads in a partnership. So it can take a variety of combinations. But in my case, my husband and I both work, and I just haven't chosen a 9-to-5 industry. I think that's another thing about investing in real estate. It's just, you can always do more. So you kind of got to set your limits. And if you want to grow your career while growing, your personal life, you can do that, but you just have to set your limits, which is kind of hard in an industry that's constantly going, and you could be sending emails at 3 a.m. and you'll get a response. So all I'd say is, it's a little bit difficult because sometimes you don't have mentors that maybe have the life that you necessarily want to lead. But at the same time, if you're able to set your own limits then and be confident about that, then I think that's very helpful.
I think that is so huge. I think a lot of people have trouble with that. And so one day you will have to teach me how to set my limits.
I'm still learning.
Kelsey.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say definitely the benefits have outweighed any challenges. I think if you have grit in this industry, you can kind of overcome any of the challenges of it being a male-dominated industry. I do think, like, one thing I would just throw out for everyone who is early in their career, or at any point in your career, it's like, if you're ever in an environment that you're constantly like reminded you're a woman, or you're being undermined or not fully respected, like, get out. Because I feel like I have had friends, gratefully, I've never been in that environment, and I've always felt, celebrated and championed as a woman. But if you are ever experiencing that, like, I've had friends who have experienced that, like, there's no reason to stay in that environment, because there are a lot of other companies that will celebrate you as a woman for your strengths and how you may operate differently than your male counterparts. And what I find really interesting from like the PE perspective is that investors are now setting new expectations for diversity, both at high level executives as well as just general staff, because it's been statistically proven that firms that have a diverse base actually outperform those who don't.
There's value there. And so if you're not being valued, that's a problem.
Exactly.
Totally. Great. It's a great point, Kelsey. It's a really great point. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about why we're even in a Zoom platform right now. So COVID has drastically changed the real estate market in our country. Can you give us some insight as it pertains to your market and focus? Amanda, let's start this one with you.
Oh boy. Okay. I mean, do we have 4 days to talk? So L+M is a New York owner operator, like I said earlier. But our kind of main core thesis is a double bottom line investment approach. So doing well while making good returns. You know, we're not concessionary in our returns, but we also try to preserve housing, multifamily housing. So what that means is entering into public-private partnerships with local government as well as the federal government. And we do that in a myriad of ways. I would say that COVID has clearly impacted the tax rolls of New York, to put it mildly. So as a result, our asset class is needed more than ever. Obviously, people need affordable housing, not just in New York, but nationally. And so as a result, we're still doing work in New York, but we're also looking nationally to think, okay, which local governments are kind of behind New York and in terms of their policies for preservation of housing. And the way that we look at it is we can bring the private capital. We don't need the scarce capital subsidy that sometimes governments provide to preserve housing. And we can invest that into that asset class, into the multifamily asset classes in, let's say, LA, Boston, Jacksonville, Tampa, you name it. But it's kind of forced us to open our eyes to think, okay, this is obviously a New York problem, but it's also a national problem, and people need to find an affordable place to live. So the good news is that, the asset class I invest in is in demand. The not so good news is that there's an infinite amount to learn about other places. So, which is also exciting. So I think it's forced us to just pivot and figure out how to apply our strategy more nationally. And in terms of asset management, wow, I feel like we could all talk to how COVID has impacted, let's say, the bottom line from a rent collections perspective. But more importantly, we kind of took a step back when this all started and decided to really address the main issues, which is that a lot of our tenants didn't have, let's say, the right internet access to access their jobs remotely, or students in our buildings didn't have, because we cater to hundreds of thousands of people, didn't have the right access to log on to school. So, yes, rent collections were down, but we were really focused on kind of delivering food, meals, internet access, kind of the basic needs, so that our tenant base could really survive in what we see as kind of blip in financial performance, but it was not our primary concern at first.
KELSEY, BODENSTAB, let's go to you next.
Yeah, so I think what's so amazing about being in real estate is, like, even in the short 10-year career that I've had, I've already seen it morph and things go in and out of favor. So for example, when I first started my career, everyone wanted retail and it was like very in favor, and now everyone's sort of off retail right now. So I think especially during times like this, it's important to think through, like, okay, what are the demographic trends that are created by a global pandemic? So for example, a lot more people are shopping online. So what does that mean for supply chains, and what that then means for both retail and industrial? So at Artemis, for example, we are trying to also think about, like, what are the next asset classes that are going to generate more institutional interest. So for example, with multifamily prices going up a lot, we're focused on niche sectors as well that are offshoots, like student housing and age-restricted housing and manufactured housing, or offshoots of industrial like cold storage. So it's always about trying to think what's going to be the next asset class or market that's in favor, and thinking about it both like the macro economic view, but also on sort of a mid-level market view and very micro location view as well.
Thanks, KELSEY. Let's go to the next KELSEY. Second KELSEY.
I think just the whole COVID crisis has really put a focus on asset management. Praedium's different than some other funds in that all our acquisitions officers also work on the asset management side, which is a big question that I would encourage everyone listening in when you're interviewing to ask how much of your work is going to be just acquisitions, how much is it going to be acquisitions and asset management, because different firms actually structure themselves differently. And I know there's a lot of other companies out there where once the acquisition is finished, you know, that deal just gets passed off to an asset management team and you may never see it again. Versus in my role, the second I close a deal, we always say that's kind of like, you know, the start of the work. Our CEO says, you know, we don't high five when we buy a deal, we high five when we sell a deal, because you have, you know, many more years of work ahead of you on one particular asset. And this kind of COVID crisis has really shifted the focus from acquisitions to asset management. And, you know, we heard across the industry that even people who are working in acquisitions who never touched asset management in their lives, you know, come March 2020, it was pretty much like everyone became an asset management person. And just having to focus on legislation, like because we do apartments, there's been so much legislation across the country at not only the national level, but the county level, the city level, impacting apartments, impacting evictions, impacting rents and collections and how much you can push rents. I have the joy of working in California, which is very, very heavy on legislation. It has been a big learning process, just tracking all the different bills in California. So I think just kind of like the heightened focus on asset management has been a big change that resulted from all this COVID stuff.
Definitely across everyone and every sector in every city and every state. Andrea.
So this has been, you know, we're long-term owners, so we've seen cycles before, obviously not of this nature, but we are lucky to have the cash, confidence, and conviction and courage, honestly, to go continue to want to grow despite the negative headlines in New York City. In our own portfolio, we saw probably vacancies rise from almost nothing to 15%, which is roughly what the market is experiencing. It's about 16% available. And we've seen, you know, the typical tenants that we see struggle in our portfolio during COVID are in nonprofits, Broadway theater related, retail, and our industrial portfolio has thrived during COVID. So, you know, unsurprisingly, e-commerce sales shot up, and you know, the need for next day delivery has been growing. So a lot of warehouses are seeking to be located near urban areas where they can deliver more quickly to their customers. It's funny because I guess, Kelsey, you mentioned at Artemis, you are focusing on where you can get institutional equity. We're sort of contrarian, and by the way, my mom is very close to Debbie Harmon. We're sort of contrarian, and we would go in the opposite direction. So right now we're focusing on New York City office, where there is no equity wants to be there. And, you know, we think it'll be tough to buy in industrial. So, you know, COVID has impacted everything in a lot of different ways. And one other way would be, we have an 8-acre site in the Bronx that's getting rezoned for 2 million square feet of residential. That is taking more time because it's related to the MTA and Metro North putting a new train stop there to go 15 minutes to Penn Station. So we're waiting on the MTA's liquidity to strengthen for that project to happen.
Let's continue this conversation a little bit about COVID and what we're going through right now. I think I'm going to know a lot of your answers to this, but I'm curious to hear a little bit in more detail. During the peak of the pandemic, has work from home been positive or negative experience in your role, and why? Who wants to start? Who hasn't started? DURELS, have you started? I don't know if I do.
I can start. So I'm in the office right now, so I clearly hate working from home. That is just a personal preference. But I just personally find that it's you know, tougher to communicate on Zoom and on the phone, and I get frustrated that I can't just go over to one of our partners' office and get quick feedback on a deal. You know, like running around on trying to get people on text and the phone. But I do feel bad for some of the younger people like our analysts and associates that haven't had the benefit of the training and the networking. I was kind of listening in a little bit to the last panel, and there was a lot of talk about just networking among your peers and networking among your analyst class, and just coming from investment banking where we have, huge 100-person analyst class. That's just so important. Those people are really going to be the people that, you're working with later on in your career when you're a managing director or a partner. So unfortunately, we have to wait until it's safe to, go out for drinks with people again. But I'm personally looking forward to being back in the office.
We need people
I
to
knew
come
it was
back to the office.
What'd you say, Andrea?
We need people to come back to work, not just, I'm at home right now because I'm post-second vaccine, but we've been back at the office since June. It's so important. New York isn't as bad as the headlines make it. I mean, all of us are mostly here, so I think we can feel it in the air that there's more activity. We're seeing more leasing tours, more activity coming up. But I think New York City streetscapes have been reimagined. We've seen them reactivated and beautified. We're coming back. It's just a matter of time, I think. So yeah, everyone get back to the office.
The energy is definitely here. Amanda.
I have to say, I live in Williamsburg and I take the ferry to work. I'm at work now too. And I feel like Kate Winslet on the Titanic.
And I took the ferry.
Oh my God, I feel like Kate Winslet on the Titanic. I'm just like, yes, this feels so good.
I felt like I was in Miami. It brought me to the wrong location, but I still took it every day.
Those details, yeah. I mean, honestly, granted, I do have 2 kids under 3, so being at home might be a bit, a little bit more disruptive, even if I have my own little corner to be in. So that can be tough. I mean, listen, the good and the bad is that we are already in an industry where work-life balance doesn't really, I mean, there is no line between life and work. Again, like everything is 24 hours. So COVID exacerbated that a bit. But I do like, once you got comfortable with Zoom, there are all these people I've met over Zoom, and some people are exhausted by Zoom. I totally get it. We all don't want to have inorganic social interactions for the rest of our lives. But there are people I've met now nationally that before COVID, I would have been, spoke to them all on the phone, and then I would have done a site visit or something like that. And now, boom, now we see each other's face, and it's a much more instant connection. So I've tried to use it to our advantage so that networking has been a lot easier in some form. But yes, like, I think what's tough about COVID, we should all admit that you're expected to be around all the time, because it's like, oh, I wonder if Amanda's going out tonight. It's like, no, she's not, obviously not, because it's COVID. And so she's home and she'll just answer my calls, and so that's tough. But again, this is all about limit setting. And it's just like, sometimes you can't do everything all the time, and you have to sleep and you have to live your life. So I think it's been a double-edged sword. I think we've learned a lot from COVID. And I also agree that, there's some new people who are starting in L+M. And as somebody who's been here for a while, I just sent them a Zoom invite being like, let's meet over Zoom, because you probably won't see my face in person for a while. And so I would just, I always encourage people internally, like, if there's somebody new here, you got to do some like face-to-face something on the phone so that they feel at least ingrained somewhat in the culture as much as they can right now.
Great points. All right, Kelsey.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. It's been a tough year for a lot of people. It's hard to be collaborative, and I miss the camaraderie of being in an office for sure. I think though, like, the silver lining is that I think in the long term, it's done really great things for, a company like Artemis, where it's headquartered in DC, and we have satellite offices in New York, LA, Atlanta. For our teams that sit in the satellite office, we now, have Zoom, obviously, screen sharing functionalities, like things that we didn't really use before. Like, people are on our instant messaging system now more than they were before, which is a much more efficient way to communicate for, little things during the day. I think also, especially for women like Amanda, who has 2 kids, like, I do think in the long run, it'll be beneficial when you need to take your child to a doctor's appointment, or you need to have some flexibility built into your schedule. And now companies know, like, okay, that person has like a full desk set up and can be productive working from home if they need to. Whereas I feel like before it wasn't a given. So I do think that there are certain positives that come out of it, but I'm certainly excited to get back to some sense of normalcy and going back into the office.
You guys all know me very well on this panel, and people literally called me during COVID, like thinking I was like gonna have a mental breakdown, like not being able to speak. But I survived. I don't love it, but I survived.
You probably thrived. No, in a sensitive way, nobody really thrived during COVID.
I had to figure it out. I had to learn how to talk on the phone. All right, so there are many young professionals and students in the audience. So what is one thing you wish you knew when you were starting your career and first applying to jobs in real estate? I think this is going to be really helpful. I think, who haven't we start? Do we start with you, BODENSTAB? I don't know if we have.
Yeah, I mean, I can go ahead. And I also caught the last few minutes of the last panel and heard, the discussion about networking. I just think it's worth repeating because it is the most important, I think, aspect, especially early in your career, of investing time in getting to know your peers, both inside of your company as well as outside. It's so difficult when you're an analyst or an associate and you're, in the weeds of a deal and carrying a lot of the weight, to then pick up and go to a networking event at 6 or 7 o'clock, because that's just not in the normal schedule. It's super important to do that though, and plant those seeds early. Like with Michelle, I mean, when we get together, it's like technically business, but I feel like I'm hanging out with a friend, it's like over time you develop these incredibly important relationships. And I think as people go into the early years of their career, it's good to keep in the back of your mind, even though it'll feel incredibly difficult and uncomfortable to get up from your desk and leave and go to a networking event, you have to prioritize that. Even if it's once a month or something, you have to hold yourself accountable to getting out there and actively networking, especially as you get more senior and more of your role and responsibility becomes about sourcing. It's absolutely critical to have that network.
Well said. Andrea.
I'd say have opinions with confidence and conviction, but make it informed. So if you're going to have an opinion, if you're going to do research, for example, on multifamily in Arizona, you need to make sure that you come to a conclusion about it for your boss or for the people you're working with, because you need to, instead of just getting stuck in the weeds, you need to be able to say from a high level, big picture, what is the underlying strategy and what's the thesis and what are the secular trends. And also show up on time or early, always be early, and always respond within a minute of people reaching out to you, because once you put it aside, it's like it's not going to happen. And that's at least for me. I mean, I need to be very, like Michelle, I'm sure, is a very advanced, sophisticated system of organizing her network and relationships and keeping like CRM and all that kind of stuff like up to date. But be on top of people, be persistent. It's admirable, and just hustle.
Love that. KELSEY.
Yeah, I guess I'll touch a little more on just applying to jobs. I think I touched on this earlier when I was coming out of undergrad. I just kind of like followed everyone else into banking and consulting, and that's what everyone else was doing. And I think, once I started interviewing for real estate jobs, like I knew what types of firms, like what size firm I wanted to work for. I knew what sector I wanted to go into. I knew I wanted to work for a private equity fund as opposed to a REIT. So I think like the more you can hone in on what it is exactly you want to do and where your interests are, I think that really shines through in an interview process. I can tell you, at least when we're interviewing for analysts and associates, I can really tell the difference between people who are just like, oh, I want to work in real estate, as opposed to like, I'm actually interested in the multifamily sector. That's why I'm interviewing with your company in particular. Like, I think kind of doing your research and knowing what exactly you want to do within real estate, whether it's working in acquisitions, like a lot of us, or working in asset management, or for a lender, I think that really shines through in the interview process.
Great. Amanda.
I am still surprised how many people I meet, if it's for an interview, that don't do their homework about who they're meeting. So it's so easy, but just come to a meeting with 3 facts about the other person. Google them. Everyone's Googleable, or on their LinkedIn, and try to have some informed questions when you go and meet them. And yeah, I would always say, and I say to the guys on my team, work smarter, not harder. If there is a problem that you're encountering and you can't find yourself getting over it for, a couple hours, let's talk about it, because life is just, it's too short to be, contemplating this one idea, and we're constantly looking at things. It's all, a lot of it's about output. And so to digest all this information and then just sit on it sometimes can cause a lot of angst. And some people are very scared to ask the question, and you should just ask it, because in a lot of ways, when the guys on my team ask me questions, I actually learn more about what I think about the portfolio, and I start thinking about things, and it becomes a much quicker process when we actually have a dialogue. So learn about the person you're meeting, and ask the questions so you can do your work better.
Awesome. All right, we have like 1 minute. We kind of touched upon this, but does anyone just quickly have any last minute pieces of advice? Because there's just a lot of students on here. Like, is there anything that any of you want to just say to them that might have helped you, or just kind of going off the cuff a little bit? Let me know.
I would say surround yourself with people that you admire and that challenge you. So if you're looking at a company, do not care about the name or what it looks like on your resume, but is the leadership there, or the people with whom you would be working, are they people that you aspire to become? Do they exhibit the values and the work ethic, as well as, a common mission that you would like to be, on like a mentee of? So that's just one thing to think about.
I would say life is short, but I would also say life is very long. So let's say you feel very discouraged, and you've interviewed and you keep on getting rejected, and it's just exhausting. It just takes one yes for you to get your first job, and just do as best as you can on that first job. And I guarantee you, those people who might have rejected you 5 more times when you were younger, when you're older, maybe they won't. And I've just seen this time and again, whether it's a deal I'm working on and a potential JV partner ghosts me and then resurfaces 2 weeks later, or, it's somebody that I reached out to do a deal with or to buy something from, and I haven't heard from them. And then we end up meeting at an event a couple months later, and it ends up happening. I would just say, like, keep the faith, and life is long, and kind of take the high road, and just make sure that, you're always presenting your best self, because life is long. And if this industry is all about relationships, it comes around usually.
Kelsey, any last words?
I would just say good luck. I think it's great the fact that you guys are even on or participating in this event today. Shows you're taking the steps to educate yourself and dip your toe in, and hopefully we'll go into the industry. I think it's been an amazing industry to work in. I have a lot of friends, family who, get a few years into their career and decide, this isn't the industry for me. And I've never once doubted I'm in the right industry. I love it. And I think it's also a great network of women. And I think I speak for all of us when I say you guys can feel free to reach out to us for advice or to connect. It's a very tight-knit group of women, because it's not a large world of women in real estate. So, we're all rooting for you, and, wish you guys the best of luck as you hopefully choose to go into real estate as a career.
Women have to stick together. Kelsey.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Better together for sure.
yeah, I'll be quick because I think we're ending, but I would say just be yourself and, don't give up. I know it's kind of cliche, but, I like the example Michelle and I just did our first deal together. We didn't think it was going to happen, but after many years of trying, we did it. So just be yourself, don't give up. And then I know there's a lot of people on the call who are probably interviewing for jobs. Praedium actually just opened 2 analyst positions. So I'll share my email in the chat, but to the extent that anyone's actively seeking an analyst position, feel free to email me directly.
Awesome, Kelsey.
Me too.
What, Andrea? Go ahead.
No, I was just saying anyone can reach out to me as well.
Awesome. You guys are all great. I wrote down 3 things: passion, don't give up, and don't write anyone off. Those are my three pieces of advice. Andrea, Kelsey, and Amanda, thank you so much for your insights today. This was so much fun. I hope you had as much fun as I did. We'll now take a short break and the forum will resume at 2:40 with my good friend and co-founder of Girl Gang, Gabby Simon.